Every single XRP holder in this market will be ecstatic if Tom Lee's prediction comes to pass, and the vast majority of those who currently own a respectable quantity will become tremendously wealthy. We need to discuss this. We must deal with this since it has a very high chance of occurring, and you should be aware of it, particularly if you own more than simply XRP. Perhaps you own Bitcoin alone, or perhaps you own several altcoins. Let's now discuss recent developments in the cryptocurrency space. First and foremost, the US-China trade agreement is perhaps the most significant issue at the moment. Everyone is discussing it. The reason for this is that it has a beneficial impact on everything. I've mentioned this on the channel numerous times as one of the main drivers of cryptocurrency because the current stock market activity is all related to numerous trade agreements that have been struck or are in progress over the past few weeks. We take a close look at the UK deal before moving on to the China Accord. Furthermore, we may observe that the trade war itself is beginning to lessen somewhat. This is highly positive because it has a significant positive impact on stocks. However, because the news was announced on a Sunday and the stock market opened on Monday, it also added more than $2 trillion to the US stock market at the same time that we witnessed this. In other words, the market gained $2 trillion. Now, if we're considering this, then, well, we're considering the future of cryptocurrency. What will happen to stocks next? However, I primarily focus on the liquidity cycle because we have been closely monitoring it each and every time we experience a significant bull run. For instance, you can look back to 2021, when the market peaked precisely at that time and the liquidity cycle did peak. We definitely have a lot more work to do when we consider where we are at this point, but we should be topping this year, which gives us plenty of time, and we could top into 2026 as well. Because 2022 is quickly approaching, it is strikingly similar to even 2021. So, my primary focus is on a market peak that will occur sometime in the early months of 2026. However, liquidity will keep getting better. Additionally, we're mostly examining the M2 supply for Bitcoin because, I'm sure, you've all been paying close attention to what Raoul Pal has been discussing regarding the M2 supply. If you haven't been paying attention to this, you're probably missing a significant aspect of what's going on with Bitcoin and the reasons it is rising in value. The supply of M2 has been increasing globally. Some very significant players have taken the lead in this. Much of the M2 supply has come from China. We're starting to print quite a bunch, and we're really looking at the US. And the M2 supply itself will blow up as a result, However, if we compare the worldwide M2 with the 12-week lead to Bitcoin, we can see that the latter is currently beginning to catch up to the former quite rapidly. As a matter of fact, Raoul, Paul, and Julian from GMI were spot on with this. Since that is precisely where the M2 supply bottomed, they draw attention to the bottoming zone surrounding Bitcoin. Furthermore, it was precisely timed if we're relying on the 12-week lead. Then Bitcoin fell. We're now far above $100,000, Furthermore, if you look at this closely, we may see a small sell-off at first, but the next significant push will send us above 110K. After that, our goal for Bitcoin is to reach $140,000 or $160,000. That is a fairly good push, isn't it? Many XRP owners would undoubtedly be pleased by that, as we ought to be in an alt season at that time as well, given that Bitcoin's dominance appears to be waning. However, what if I told you that's only the beginning and that Bitcoin might rise much higher? That's what Tom Lee is saying anyway. There are actually two video snippets. First, according to Tom Lee, I believe that Bitcoin will overtake gold now that the leverage is complete. And this is essentially simply discussing the deleveraging of gold into cryptocurrency. Now, he made this statement in late April or early May itself. And that's just what transpired. Correct. Gold began to lose its appeal. After that, we began to witness the significant shift back toward Bitcoin. But take a look. Additionally, Bitcoin is up nearly 3.5%. I haven't introduced you, yet I'm already speaking with you about this. Tom Lee, the Chief Investment Officer at Fundstrat Capital, the Head of Research at Fundstrat, and a CNBC contributor should be introduced. And I can't recall if it was you or Pump who mentioned that Bitcoin typically follows a few months later but has a much bigger surge when we were discussing how it was kind of stalled below 85,000 with gold rising daily. Most likely that was a Pump. Most likely he is quite bullish. Indeed, have you observed anything akin to that? That's a rather significant change, considering that gold has been declining over the last 2 to 3 months. In any case, gold may have surpassed Bitcoin this year and reached all-time highs. It should be able to accomplish 4,000 with ease, right? Do you believe that Bitcoin will someday receive some of the same bids and funds? Yes, I believe that some of the deleveraging that was taking place for institutional investors early this year may have caused problems for Bitcoin, selling only what they were able to. Indeed, they sold what they could, which I believe suppressed Bitcoin, particularly on weekends. However, now that the deleveraging is complete, I believe Bitcoin will overtake gold. Additionally, Bitcoin's previous peak was above 110,000. As a kind of non-dollar asset, I believe there is a lot of space to catch up. Regarding the equity markets, you may find equities appealing, but uncertainty remains the dominant factor and will continue to do so. What did you say about the VIX peak on April 7th, in your opinion? Does that hold true? Yes, I believe it will be difficult to regain that degree of terror. I believe that the level of uncertainty has likely peaked, even with this Fed dispute, that is. However, I'm not sure if the pain is at its worst yet. I believe there is still a chance that the economic ramifications will make markets cautious, but it will be difficult to replicate that anxiety. Thus, I believe there was a structural load, and I concur with Tom Lee entirely, don't I? I do believe that a major low has been reached. I would say that the end of February, early March, and possibly the middle of April were when the panic was at its highest. The general atmosphere was one of intense terror. For weeks, the trade and tariff wars were being covered by the mainstream media. It's a very different perspective on the market now, you know. In this regard, I do agree with Tom Lee. Furthermore, what was his forecast for the price of Bitcoin? Lee Tom. This year, Bitcoin might reach $250,000. Banks are going to get FOMO about cryptocurrency. We lack sufficient bullishness. Furthermore, this is simply more current. Take a look. What's going on in the Bitcoin stadium? We are now at 91,000. What is that? In this kind of examination, what is that an indication or signal of? Fed is stupid. Yes, it's not cutting. Indeed, Bitcoin is down about 15% from its peak, which is a fairly typical correction for such a volatile asset. It is also marginally tracking global liquidity, but this halving cycle is still relatively new. In my opinion, Bitcoin is likely to be one of the best performing assets in the near future. Our technician believes that 70,000 is where we can sort of take a stand, which means you're getting a large chance. Hold on, you still believe that it will drop to $70,000? Or that it is the floor, in which case you would still purchase it at this price? Yes, Fibonacci's is one of them. Thus, $70,000 would be one level. Will you repeat that? Retracement levels exist. Thus, you retreat from your rallying point. Correct. $70,000 then is one level. It might drop as low as $50,000. Again, though, that is not a new level. Just before it starts to rally, it touches. All right, let me pose another query to you. Are you suggesting that this is a reasonable and good price to enter the Bitcoin market? Or are you advising people who are not currently investing in Bitcoin or who